you had a great weekend. Welcome to a new week of Scott Fox After 9, and happy Budget Eve. Tomorrow, the federal budget comes down. One of the most consequential budgets in our history. It is going to have generational spending and produce generational debt. That's why I hope you can listen to this episode of Scott Fox After 9. In this one, you're going to hear lots from Prime Minister Mark Carney. Controversy on the weekend when Mark Carney admitted Donald Trump was telling the truth. Mark Carney did apologize, and he kind of threw Doug Ford under the bus again. So we're going to break down what the prime minister had to say on Saturday. And if you're one of the doubters, one of those people who, when you heard Donald Trump say, Mark Carney apologized to me, said, oh, there we go, Donald Trump's lying again. It wasn't a lie. You're going to hear Carney confirm that he did apologize, and you're going to hear him explain why. Then I'm going to move over and play lots from Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre, I think, is on the same page as me. I think he can read the room and he sees where this is going. It really seems like we're going to be having an election. I should talk about that before I get too far into this episode, because there's still some people that message me wondering, Scott, we just had an election. How could we have another one? Well, for those who don't know, quick summary. We have a minority government. The Canadian people did not give Mark Carney a majority to just impose his will on the Canadian people. He has to get agreement from at least one of the opposition parties to pass anything that he wants passed, including the budget. Now, typically, the budget would come out in April. That's the beginning of the fiscal year. We're now, halfway through, almost 2/3 of the way through the fiscal year, and we still don't have a budget. And this one is going to promise record spending and record debt. And Mark Carney wants us to be okay with that. The opposition parties have already, in their own way, signaled they're not really interested in supporting this budget. And I think that they've got the Canadian people on their side. Even people who love Mark Carney. I don't think they're too thrilled about the possibility of a deficit in and around $100 billion. We have a debt right now of $1.4 trillion. That's the last number as of 2024 when we last got a budget, $1.4 trillion. And he wants to add close to $100 billion a year in deficit. How can we do that? And is the money that he wants to spend going to be spent properly so that we can say, well, you know what? We went huge into debt here, massive deficit, but we are no longer reliant on America, or the country is making a ton of money from all of these new revenue streams and the budget. We can pay down the debt quickly. I don't know that a lot of Canadians have that kind of optimism. And that's part of the reason I think the opposition parties kind of want to bring down the government over this budget. The Conservatives are probably not going to support it. The Bloc Québécois, probably not going to support it. Both of those parties put out a list of conditions that they wanted the prime minister to meet. And that's perfectly reasonable for them to do. Again, it's not on the opposition to find a way to agree with the government. It's on the government to get the opposition parties on their side so that we have some sort of a consensus when we pass a budget. Well, if that budget doesn't pass, we're going to be having an election. The Governor General will have no choice but to dissolve Parliament, drop a writ, and we would be voting sometime in December. Now, there is a possibility that we could avoid that. The NDP would have to vote with the Liberals. I don't think the NDP really wants to do that. I also know they're broke and they're really not ready to fight an election. But if I'm the NDP and looking at the situation here, they're going to get a ton of free media anyway. They always do because they're a party in the House of Commons. I think that they're going to be good enough to run a campaign. They certainly can't do any worse than they've done in the last election. What do they have, 7 seats or something like that? I don't think they could drop much lower, so they don't really have a lot to lose. The NDP might want an election. The latest opinion polls have the Conservatives now ahead of the Liberals. Does that mean the Mark Carney honeymoon is over? Not necessarily, but it certainly shows that support is softening. And I'm not sure what would happen if we have an election. There's a scenario where it is a conservative majority, a liberal majority, minority, either way. But right now, if the election were held, it would probably be a conservative minority government. And I'm wondering, are Canadians ready for that? Are Canadians ready to finally make the change? to say no more. We did 10 years of Trudeau and Carney, and we're ready for a new, fresh approach. We're ready for a new leader at the helm. We'll find out. The government needs to fall first, and step one is tabling that budget tomorrow. And again, it is going to include a ton of spending and a ton of debt. Some people would say we need that. Other people would say that's the last thing we need right now. And you're going to hear both sides of that in this episode. I haven't done it in a while, so before I get to the content, I want to declare, if you're new to the podcast, my name is Scott Fox. I'm a conservative. What you hear in this podcast is coming to you from the lens of a conservative, someone who's always voted conservative. But I also want you to know that I'm fair. I really care most about the middle class. And I think I identify as a conservative because the conservatives are the party of the middle class. Thinking about the people who are not wealthy elites, not connected to people in government and swaying contracts their way, just the regular law-abiding folks that pay their taxes, work hard, and just want to get ahead for themselves and their family. That's how I identify. So what you hear may be a little bit skewed, again, because it's coming from the lens of a conservative. But part of the reason I point that out is because most of the mainstream media is on the left. Liberal or New Democrat. And they never declare that. You know, they'll do their newscast and they'll file their reports and they never tell you that they're a liberal or a New Democrat, but their reporting certainly leans that way in the way they question, in the way they edit things. That's why I think the mainstream media is a huge problem, because they manipulate a lot of people and they never tell you what their bias is. Well, I'm trying to set the record straight. I have a bias. As much as I try to be fair, though, I am a conservative. Having said that, now you know where all the chips lie. Let's get into what happened on the weekend. I'm going to start off with a news conference that Prime Minister Carney did on Saturday. Here's him talking about the infamous apology to Donald Trump.
Hi, Prime Minister. Mackenzie Gray with Global News. Did you apologize to Donald Trump about Ontario's anti-tariff ad?
I did. I did apologize to the president. The president was offended by the act, or by the ad, rather. And it's not something I would have done, which is to put in place that advertisement. And so I apologize to him.
Before I go any further, how do you feel having heard that? Especially if you're one of the people who had your elbows up and voted for Mark Carney because you believed Mark Carney when he said he was the guy who could handle Trump. He was the guy who would stand up to the bully. He was the guy who would not capitulate to Donald Trump. He said Pierre Poilievre would be the guy to capitulate to Donald Trump. And now Mark Carney has done it and kind of thrown Doug Ford under the bus. We know from Premier Ford that he showed that ad to Mark Carney. Did Mark Carney tell him not to run it and Doug did it anyway? Or did Mark Carney really not make it clear that he does not want that ad run and that it's not going to help the situation?
I'm the one, in English, I'm the one who is responsible in my role as Prime Minister for the relationship with the President of the United States, and the federal government is responsible for the foreign relationship with the U.S. government. So things happen, we take the good with the bad, and I apologize to him.
He apologized to Donald Trump. Do you think he owed Donald Trump an apology? A lot of people think he did. A lot of people think that that apology was the first step in trying to make amends, because, of course, that ad led to President Trump ending trade talks with Canada. That's it. It's done. It's over. He doesn't want to negotiate with us. Did Mark Carney do what he had to do? Or did Mark Carney do what he wanted to do? Why did that apology happen? Because I don't think Doug Ford is going to be particularly happy that Mark Carney apologized to Donald Trump on behalf of Canada, because that really does throw Doug Ford under the bus. Doug says he did nothing wrong. He calls it the most successful ad in history. I wonder how he feels now knowing Mark Carney disagreed. Mark Carney claims he didn't want that ad run, and he apologized to Donald Trump. I think there's a lot of people, maybe even some listening to this episode right now, that have a real hard time swallowing the fact that Donald Trump wanted an apology and our prime minister gave it to him. Does that make you angry? Or was he doing what he had to do? Or is this all a game? Did the good cop, bad cop thing go sideways and now they're trying to scramble around to fix it? Did they not anticipate that the ad would make Donald Trump that angry? Well, I'll tell you what, over the weekend, and I'll get back to Prime Minister Carney in just a sec. First, I want to play something for you here. This is Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary. He was doing the media rounds this weekend. He stopped at CNN and he stopped at Fox News. Let's hear what he has to say, because I think he does a pretty good job at articulating the Americans' position on that ad. Scott Bessent on Fox News.
The president said he's gotten an apology from the Canadian Prime Minister about an anti-tariff ad that ran there using some old footage of President Reagan. But he says the trade talks are not back on. How do they get back on with Canada?
We'll see. I don't know about you, Shannon, but many of my worst fights have been with family members. We eventually make up. But this was very serious. This Prime Minister of Ontario, who I imagine is smarting quite a bit from the Blue Jays' loss last night, spent, I heard, $75 million broadcasting across the U.S. border trying to sway public opinion. Now, if we're upset about what happens during foreign interference in our elections, this is foreign interference in U.S. public policy, and I agree with President Trump 100%. A price has got to be paid for this, so over time we'll see what happens.
Well, we'll watch to see if they kiss and make up, as family members often do.
Okay, he's making it very clear. The Americans did not appreciate that ad. They considered that us interfering in their politics. And if you flip it around, which I did last week, and since I've done that, now everybody's doing it. But I'll do it again because I was the OG on this one. If the Americans had taken out millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of advertisements in Canada on Canadian radio and TV networks and online, trying to convince us to go along with something America wanted to do that our government disagreed with vehemently, there would be outrage. If Donald Trump was buying ads to influence the Canadian people and buying those ads on Canadian television to do it, there would be outrage. People would not tolerate the Americans interfering in our domestic affairs. And what Scott Bessent is trying to say here is that it's the same thing, but we were doing it to them. Here's one more. He talked to Jake Tapper on State of the Union on CNN.
And Jake, this is unacceptable that I read that the Premier of Ontario spent $75 million sending propaganda across the U.S. border via
Ronald Reagan's own words.
Via our airwaves. Via our own airwaves. It's the equivalent of election interference. Nobody likes foreign election interference. Nobody likes foreign governments trying to sway public opinion.
And that's essentially what we did. We were trying to sway public opinion. Doug Ford said it himself. We were trying to start a conversation. He wanted to put pressure on U.S. politicians from the ground up. Get to the American people. They make it clear to their politicians that they don't like how Canada's being treated. And then those politicians make it clear in Washington. That was the way he wanted it to work. But wow, did this ever backfire. Here is more of Prime Minister Carney's news conference on Saturday.
Judy Train with CTV News. Prime Minister, if I could just ask for your clarification. You said that you told Doug Ford that he shouldn't air the ad. My question then, the fact that Premier Ford went ahead with the ad, the fact that the Premier of BC wants to put out an ad, the fact that the Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew, supports Doug Ford's ad, does this show that there is division within Team Canada, that the premiers don't trust you to negotiate?
I think there is, well, the individuals can speak for themselves, and they're practiced in speaking to themselves, and they will speak for themselves. There are other premiers who have different view in terms of the utility of those ads, and you can speak to them. I'll repeat what the situation is with those who actually have been talking with the Americans and have been negotiating with the Americans. That we start from this position, which it does bear remembering, that we are in a position where 85% of our trade is tariff-free. We, like every other country in the world, okay? Every other country in the world has issues if they produce any of the following: steel, aluminum, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, forest products, with 232, so-called 232 tariffs in the United States. And so that's what we're having discussions with or that's what we were having discussions with the Americans. That's where we're negotiating. We were making progress. Those talks are suspended. That's the situation at present. And it has a couple of implications. One of the core implications is it absolutely validates the strategy we have had from day one, which is to focus on the things we can control. Yes, negotiate with the United States. Of course, that's important. But building Canada at home, which is what this budget is going to do, with generational investments, the scale of investment that this country has never seen before. That's what this budget is looking to unlock, and to be building new partnerships with countries around the world. And there is no better place to do that than in the fastest growing part of the world that represents 60% of the global economy. We can adjust for the American component of that, but there's everyone else. So if I take it down to a little more than 40% of the global economy, ex the United States. And those are the discussions we're having. And you can see the traction we're getting. Free trade.
I'm going to cut the Prime Minister off. And it's sad that I have to do that, but he's not answering the question. It was a very simple question from Judy at CTV. Does that mean there's a fracture in Team Canada? Doug Ford, along with New Democrat Premier David Eby in British Columbia and New Democrat Premier Wab Kinew in Manitoba, they all love it. BC's considering running their own ad. Is there a division here in Team Canada? We know that Mark Carney has got his strategy, and Doug Ford vehemently disagrees with that strategy. Doug Ford has got a you hit us, we'll hit you back type strategy. That's his philosophy. Mark Carney seems to be somewhat more of a diplomat. If anything, I don't know. I mean, we haven't made any progress here, guys. The tariffs are worse now than they were, and trade talks are suspended. And I understand it was the ad from Doug Ford that suspended trade talks, but it wasn't going very well to begin with. Where are we at here? I think it's interesting that the Prime Minister would not answer that question.
With respect, Prime Minister, the United States makes up more than 75% of our trade.
I'm well aware of that. Yeah.
Yes. You apologized to Donald Trump. He's not going back to the table. He has no interest. So what are you doing? What is your next move, or are you close to striking out?
Very clever. No, I just fouled one off. The count is full, but we're battling like the Jays. Look, the next move is on Tuesday. The next move is the budget. It's the budget for this time. The budget the country needs. The budget that gives us control. See, this is one of the things. We can spend our time watching Truth Social, worrying about the reactions of individual things. We are staying calm. Okay? We're focusing on what we can control, which first and foremost is how we build at home. And secondly, with our negotiations with the U.S., when they're on, when they come back on, is what's in the best interests of Canada. Not emotional, what's in the best interests of Canada. They will only agree, the Americans will only agree, as is the case in any trade negotiation, something that also is in the U.S. interest. There are a number of things where those interests align. And we'll wait until they're ready.
This is urgent. The Prime Minister kind of alluded to that. He knows it's urgent. What did he say? Full count and he just fouled one off? Bottom of the ninth kind of thing? Yeah, we need to get this deal done with the Americans. Judy was right there in that question. 75% of our trade is with America. Now, I know that there is a big effort to try and diversify that trade. But I'm looking at what the Prime Minister came back from Asia with, and there's nothing there. There's no big deals. We signed a deal with the Philippines on coconuts and stupid stuff. I mean, there's no major deal. He didn't come back and say China's going to buy $1 trillion worth of liquid natural gas from Canada. He didn't come back and say South Korea is going to invest in Canadian aerospace technology and they're going to buy fighter jets from Canada and we're going to develop them and sell them. Like nothing. No major deals here. And trade talks with the Americans are on hold. Now, maybe you're okay with that. Maybe you are. Coming up, you'll hear the other side of the story when I play Pierre Poilievre, who's going to talk about this budget that the Prime Minister is going to release tomorrow. He says, because trade talks are suspended, we need this budget for this time in our history. And I'm curious to hear if you agree or disagree with the Prime Minister after I play that for you. Here is more of Mark Carney.
Hi, Prime Minister. Sarah Ritchie with the Canadian Press. If you cast your mind back to April during the election campaign, I know it feels like a long time ago for me, you told Canadians that China was the biggest security threat to this country and to Canadians. Do you still believe that to be the case?
I think we have to manage all our threats. There are a number of threats from a country mentioned, Russia. We've non-state actor threats, which are material. I guess, one of the advantages of having your security clearance is you're better informed about some of the threats, and I highly recommend that anyone, either in the position of responsibility or seeking it, has their security clearance. So I have a richer sense of the tapestries of threats that face our country. And I'll tell you one thing, if I may, and I'll hand back after this.
No, we don't need to hear it. Hey, listen, that is the sure sign that we're going to an election when Mark Carney is reverting to Pierre Poilievre doesn't have a security clearance. Mark Carney is basically saying that he misunderstood the threat that China poses to Canada. I'm old enough to remember when we were told China is the biggest threat to this country. Trudeau said it. Carney said it. For him to turn that around into, well, Pierre Poilievre doesn't have a security clearance. Listen, Mark, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell anyone who wants to harp on this particular point. Pierre Poilievre has made it very, very clear that he already has security clearance. He's already been cleared. If he needs to be cleared again, fine. But he is not going to agree to receive a briefing on a topic that once he's briefed, he's not allowed to talk about it. That would be completely stupid for a leader of the opposition to do. Yeah, in a perfect world, when it wasn't all about politics, when we were really just trying to find the best way for our country, yeah, it'd be nice if all of the opposition leaders were briefed on the various security threats. But because things are so political and because there's so many accusations of interference and things like that, we can't do that. We can't have the opposition leader hold the government to account if they're gagged because they got a security briefing. The whole thing is a chicken and egg scenario. Do you get the briefing and not be able to criticize, or do you get the briefing and you'll know, but you can't say anything about it? That's the dilemma that the leader of the opposition is faced with. So that's why Pierre Poilievre has not been briefed on many of those things. But I assure you, if he becomes prime minister, he will get his security clearance very, very quickly, and he will be briefed on everything that the prime minister needs to be briefed on. Sometimes I think Carney forgets that he's the prime minister. Yeah, he needs to be briefed on these things, and he needs to act and respond. If he's going to take political shots on something as serious as that, I think that shows that it's uglier than we thought, and we're closer to an election than some people think. One more from the Prime Minister, then I'm going to switch and go to Pierre Poilievre.
Are you prepared to fight an election on this question?
I'm always prepared to stand up for the right thing.
Next question.
Okay.
What?
He's always ready to stand up and do the right thing. The Prime Minister needs one of the opposition parties to support his budget, or he needs them to stay home. The Liberals need 3 votes, other than Liberals, to pass the budget. It's also possible that some of the parties who may vote against the budget could have some of their members sit out, just not show up in the House, or officially abstain from the vote. It's cowardly, but they might do that, and that would allow the budget to pass. This budget is going to be extremely consequential, in my estimation, because of the amount of money that it's spending and the amount of bureaucracy it's creating and the amount of civil servants that are going to lose their job. And there's so many different reasons that this budget is incredibly important tomorrow. Canada's got to get this right. If that budget gets approved, the money is gone. It will be out the door as quickly as you can imagine, because I feel like this money is going to insiders. I feel like a lot of people are going to get very, very wealthy. And I think in 5 years, when we look back at November 2025 and see that budget and compare how much got done, we're not going to be able to point to much. We've heard this time and time again from Justin Trudeau. Lots of promises, tons of money gets spent, no actual results. Let's hear what the leader of the opposition thinks. Before I get to Pierre Poilievre talking about politics, I'm going to start off with the first question he was asked just yesterday. It's him talking about a topic that got discussed a lot this weekend. You see, the Supreme Court of Canada in a split decision, 5-4, ruled that mandatory minimum sentences for possession of child pornography are unconstitutional. Now, I'm going to respectfully disagree with the justices that said it's unconstitutional. And let me tell you why. Because the Constitution and the Charter applies to everybody, every Canadian. And while the Supreme Court, the justices here, seem to be concerned about the charter rights of pedophiles, I'm wondering who cares about the charter rights of the kids who were abused and trafficked and that will have lifetime trauma. They will always be victimized by what happened to them. While these perverts and sickos are sharing this stuff online. I'm more worried about the kids and their rights than I am about the rights of a pedophile. So here's Pierre Poilievre. He's going to talk about this topic, and then we're going to get into the economy. Please listen very carefully to this one because it's something that is going to come up. He's going to talk about using the Notwithstanding Clause. I'm someone who believes the Notwithstanding Clause should be used in very, very, very limited circumstances. Just like this one. When the court gets it wrong, the will of the people must be reflected. We have the Notwithstanding Clause so that justices cannot just completely change around laws. And they've been ruling down a lot of different laws surrounding mandatory minimum sentences. Should we use the Notwithstanding Clause to make sure that pedophiles stay in jail? I think that's an appropriate use of it, and I think that reflects the will of the people. Here is this exchange between Pierre and a reporter. Then again, I'll get to the economy.
Hello, Anya Kudadeglia from the Canadian Press. I wanted to get your reaction to the Nova Scotia's government response to the Supreme Court decision that came out last week, striking down mandatory minimums for child pornography. Basically, the Nova Scotia Justice Minister says they have grave concerns and they want the Liberal government to take action. So what's your response, and what would you like to see the Liberals do?
Thank you. Great question. I was really disgusted with this ruling. The two convicted pedophiles in question contributed to the torment and torture of literally hundreds of kids. One of them had 377 pornographic images of children between 3 and 6 years old. Another had hundreds of videos of children, I think between the ages of 5 and 10. That is the age range of my children. And let us be clear, that is not a victimless crime. The monsters who look at this material create a profit motive for literally hundreds of kids to be tortured and humiliated in videos that may circulate for the rest of their lives. They will never recover from this trauma. And yet, these two perverts are going to get out of jail in a year and 9 months. Frankly, those sentences were far too low. And now the court says that some other users of child pornography should be able to get out in less than that time. This is insane. It's nuts. And quite frankly, should Canadians make me their Prime Minister, I will use the Notwithstanding Clause, and I will bring in mandatory prison sentences for users of child porn that are far higher than the ones that were already in place. In other words, the mandatory minimums I will institute using the Charter of Rights and Freedoms will be far, far tougher than the ones the court just shut down. And finally, I will do that to uphold the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because those hundreds of kids, they have charter rights. And I'm more worried about the charter rights of our children than I am about these perverts and pedophiles.
Well said. Is there anybody that disagrees with that except for 5 of our Canadian Supreme Court justices? Is there anyone who disagrees? I'm not going to get too into the nuance of the decision that the court released, but I'll point out again, the reason that we have the Notwithstanding Clause is for scenarios just like this. The judges imagined some weird scenario about, well, what if 2 18-year-olds are sexting each other and then they're in possession of child porn? Should we really send them to jail? It was stupid. Pierre Poilievre laid out the facts of this case. These were children. Like, these were kids being sexually abused. Under 10 years old. Some of them even much younger. Being sexually abused, and these perverts were watching that nonsense and sharing it. and the Supreme Court thinks it's unconstitutional to give them a minimum 1 year in jail as like a minimum. It could be more, but they think it's as a minimum. That's too much. It's not fair. It's a violation of their charter rights. I do not accept that. And God, I will tell you, it is so nice and refreshing to hear a Canadian leader stand up and say what needs to be said and what Canadians are thinking. You can tell that is a man who loves his kids, who loves his family, and the thought of a kid being abused like that for the sexual enjoyment of these sick pedophiles, he's going to lock him up. I believe him when he says he's going to lock him up, and it's going to be for a long time. That is a perfectly appropriate use of the Notwithstanding Clause. The court can rule whatever the court wants to rule. I'm not trying to besmirch our court in any way, but when what they rule does not reflect the will of the Canadian people, the elected government of the day, then we have to use that Notwithstanding Clause. And again, I think it should be used sparingly, but I think it's very, very appropriate in this case. Now, let's get to Pierre Poilievre talking about the economy. Great question. Good little exchange here with the CBC reporter before he gets to this part. But I think this is important, and I think that if we do have an election in December, this is what it's all going to come down to. Listen to Pierre Poilievre.
Hi, Mr. Poilievre. JP Tasker from CBC News. How are you doing?
Very well. Well, and I would have been better if the game had gone differently last night.
I know. I'm a little bummed out myself.
Did you stay up and watch the whole thing?
I did.
Yeah, you look like you
heartbreaker.
could use a coffee like me.
Yeah. It wasn't great.
Yeah. Well, I'd say it was great, but it was just not the ending we wanted. But what a hell of a season. I think we have to give the team great credit for uniting all Canadians around this incredible sporting event. I was never a baseball fan, I'll be honest. I grew up a football and a hockey guy. But since October, I have been a very loyal, unflinching fan to the Blue Jays, and I want to thank them for all they did to give us an exciting and thrilling World Series.
Do you want an election before Christmas?
We want an affordable budget that will give Canadians affordable life before Christmas. That's my priority. We shouldn't be playing, Mark Carney shouldn't be playing games and trying to force an election. He should be sitting down with us. I'm willing to work all through the night, tonight and tomorrow, to come up with an affordable budget that will make an affordable life for Canadians. But we will not vote to raise grocery prices and increase housing costs as the Liberals have done over the last decade. Canadians cannot afford any more Liberal sacrifices. So my message is one of let's bring in a budget that's affordable so that we can have hope, jobs, and homes for all Canadians.
And that, I think, is what it comes down to. The Liberals want a budget that promises generational spending and generational debt. Your grandkids will still be paying off the debt that Mark Carney wants to rack up in 2025 on a budget that is 6-7 months late now. The fiscal year is half over, and he wants to drop massive spending, and it's going to come with cuts too. He's already warned us Canadians are going to have to make some sacrifices. I think we've sacrificed enough, and I think that that's going to be the talking point for the Conservatives if we go into an election. And even if we don't, Pierre Poilievre is right. We've sacrificed enough. We've been through hell, especially the last 5 years. Our economy is tanking. Jobs are being lost at an alarming rate. We've been promised a ton of stuff by our government that we never got, and things are looking pretty bleak right now. That's what this election is going to come down to. Do you want that generational spending and generational debt and lots of cuts? Or do you want what Pierre Poilievre is proposing? A manageable deficit, a manageable debt, a responsible budget that doesn't overspend, getting rid of people in the civil service, but doing it through attrition rather than just laying off 70,000 people. That's the number that the Public Service Alliance of Canada is saying. 70,000 more Canadians out of work when Mark Carney is done slashing the federal civil service. I think that people have really got to ask themselves where we're at and how much more debt we can pile on, and whether or not the spending that the Liberals want to do is going to be effective, whether or not it's going to get spent appropriately, whether we need to start trying to live within our means and rein in spending so that the government doesn't have to print money, which of course leads to more inflation, which leads to higher interest rates again, and all these other factors. There's two plans in front of us, and it's time for Canadians to decide. How many more job losses do you want to see? How much more do you want to see your home go down in value? How many more months do young people have to go with no prospects for getting a job? These are the choices that are in front of us right now.
Coming back to the budget, lowering taxes is great for people who pay taxes, and that's often middle and higher income. Thinking about the kind of people who'd use this food bank, lower income Canadians who may not benefit from lower taxes in a big way, are there some other affordability measures that a conservative government or that Conservatives might advocate now, specifically aimed at the folks who might use this place?
Yes, absolutely. I want to cut the worst, most immoral tax of all, the tax that targets the poorest people the most, and that is the inflation tax. Inflation happens when governments print money and bid up the cost of everything people buy. It is proven beyond any doubt that the poorest people suffer the most as a result of inflation because they do not have assets that insulate them from the rising cost of living. The inflation tax, the liberal inflation tax, takes from the poor and gives to the rich. It takes from the have-nots and gives to the have-yachts. So when the reason why the food bank use has gone up by over 100% during the massive expansion of liberal government spending and deficits is because the inflation that spending has caused has landed on the shoulders of single moms and seniors and others who can't pay their bills. So when we talk about capping liberal deficits, it's not to please accountants who are looking at spreadsheets. It's to stop inflation so that the hardworking, the working poor, the people who get out of bed every day and work hard for not a lot of money will at least preserve the purchasing power of their dollar. Also, let's get rid of the industrial carbon tax, which again, driving up energy costs will drive up the cost of living on the poorest people. We can't allow that. Our working poor in this country cannot afford more expensive energy. If you want to defeat poverty, there's the two best ways to do it is to have strong money that buys affordable food, homes, and fuel, and abundant, affordable energy for all. That's how we're going to make this a poverty-free nation.
I mean, those are the choices that we have in front of us. You've heard from the Prime Minister. You've now heard from Pierre Poilievre. Two very, very different perspectives. Very different. Which way are we going to go, Canada? Do you want that budget passed? Are you okay with what Mark Carney is proposing becoming law and giving the Liberals that much money to just slush around with? Are you confident that that money will not be wasted and it will not go to corrupt individuals? Are you confident that it will not get wasted on bureaucracy and it will actually go to people and programs that benefit people? Do you believe that? Or could we do it the other way? Repeal all of the different regulations that the Liberals have put in over the last 10 years that have made life more expensive. Have a government that has a cap on spending so they can't print more money and create more inflation and bid up the price of everything. Two very, very different plans. And I'm not saying that Mark Carney doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm not saying Pierre Poilievre doesn't know what he's talking about. It's just two different philosophies. And this is the difference. In stark contrast, it's black and white. The difference between liberalism and conservatism. Which way do you think we're going to go? Should that budget pass? Do you want that budget to pass? Because if the budget doesn't pass, we will be having an election. If Pierre Poilievre wins that election, what he's proposing may actually happen. If he loses and we end up with a liberal majority, well, that's going to be at least 4 more years of what Mark Carney is promising. Generational spending, generational debt.
Do you think it was appropriate for the Prime Minister to apologize to Trump for the Ontario ad? And if not, what would you have done in that scenario?
Well, first of all, I would have provided the strong leadership so that provinces did not have to all run off in their own direction. Now, we don't see a variety of different governors in the U.S. being forced to run ads in Canada or do their own diplomacy. We see that because Mark Carney has been weak, indecisive, he has no plan, and he's broken all of his promises. So the provinces have been left with no choice but to fill the void that Carney's weak leadership has left behind. And then Mr. Carney has been very duplicitous. He approved the ad, and then he condemned the ad, and then he apologized for the ad. He embarrassed himself and regrettably the whole country. And we can't trust Mark Carney abroad. We can't afford him here at home. Thank you.
Okay, strong words there from Pierre Poilievre, but again, we're really starting to see the contrast between what Mark Carney wants to do and what Pierre Poilievre wants to do. Red versus blue, left versus right, or liberalism versus conservatism. Conservatism is very, very simple. This is something that I do in my own home and you probably do in yours. We live within our means. We can't continuously borrow money because the borrowing cost eventually swallows up all of the available money. You spend more trying to service your own debt than you do trying to get your family ahead. Liberalism is what Mark Carney is promising. Generational spending, but generational debt. Cuts, but part of a grand vision for years down the line. Those are the two options in front of us. So again, I'll ask you, do you support Mark Carney's budget or do you support what Pierre Poilievre wants to do? Two very different strategies playing out in real time, and there are real high stakes here. If that budget does pass, the amount of debt that this country is going to have is going to be staggering. The deficit is going to be unbelievable. The amount we're going to have to pay in interest is something that I don't even know where the money's going to come from, but I suspect, particularly if he gets a majority, we're going to be facing steep tax increases. That's the only way that Mark Carney can do it. And I don't blame him. He's not going to come out here and tell you, I want to force an election because I want a majority, because I want this budget to go through, and I'm going to raise your taxes because there's no other option but to raise your taxes by a lot. Can we withstand that? Will people stand for that? I don't know. There's one more set of audio that I want to play for you here, and this is something that I didn't envision myself doing, but I'm going to give full credit to Rosemary Barton. Rosemary Barton hosts Rosemary Barton Live on the CBC on Sunday mornings. Rosemary Barton is very left-wing. She's someone who actually sued the Conservative Party during an election because they used one of her interview clips in a commercial. She is no friend of the Conservative Party at all, but she did have Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on her show this weekend. I think that was good, and I'm going to tell you right now, I was actually pleasantly surprised with Rosemary's line of questions. It was actually somewhat of a debate, and I think interviews like this are great. That's part of the reason that I really wish more politicians would sit down in a format like this and talk to people like Rosemary or talk to people like me. There's two areas in particular in this exchange that I want to highlight for you.
I want to move on to the budget, because that is, of course, sort of the concern and the focus of the week ahead. That you have criticized the Prime Minister for saying that sacrifices are going to be needed by Canadians. You have also said the deficit must stay at $42 billion. How do you keep the deficit at $42 billion and not make sacrifices and not ask Canadians to make sacrifices?
Well, I think it's a false juxtaposition because the deficit is causing the sacrifices. The more the government spends, the more things cost. The cost of government is driving up the cost of living. These deficits are raising the prices that people pay in real time. It's called inflation, and we know that the source of inflation is when government prints money to spend what it does not have. This bids up the price of goods, and it's why. It's no coincidence that during the time the Liberals doubled the national debt, they also doubled housing costs and doubled lineups at food banks. So
except some of the things that will be in the budget will be for housing to help Canadians. That is what they are proposing to do to help Canadians in this moment.
But with every dollar they spend comes from Canadians. And so they remember Justin Trudeau and the previous Liberal government launched a bunch of expensive housing programs saying it would help. It doubled housing costs. They announced food programs. Well, they doubled food bank lineups. So the more government spends, the more it drives up the cost of living. We can't have a costly budget that makes life more costly for the Canadian people. We want them to keep their promise. It was only a year ago that Liberals said they would keep the deficit down to $41 billion. Now, Mark Carney was elected saying he would spend less. And since that time, he's spending, his deficit spending, is 100% more.
But you know that his reasoning, what he will tell Canadians on Tuesday, is that he's investing. It's meant to spur investment in the Canadian economy. Things like defense, housing, as I said, industries dealing with tariffs. What of those things do you not agree with? Because he believes that investment will actually attract private capital and will force the economy to sort of rebuild in the face of Donald Trump.
You know, it seems like a familiar line, because it's exactly what the Liberals promised in 2015, 10 years ago, when they ran on producing small temporary deficits that would invest. And what happened? They doubled the national debt. And what happened to investment? It dropped more than any time in Canadian history and more than any other G7 country. Deficits are not investments. They reduce investments because they borrow money out of the economy that would otherwise have been invested in productive private enterprises, factories, mines, pipelines, LNG plants. So when government borrows, it actually subtracts from the economy by sucking up capital that would have been used for productive purposes. So if we want investment, there's only one thing the government needs to do: get out of the way. There are trillions of dollars of private investment ready to dig mines, build pipelines, set up LNG plants, build ports. We know that money exists because they're doing it in other countries around the world where there is fast approvals, less red tape, low taxes. They get private sector investment, and that's what we want to watch.
But by that explanation, by that rationale, why would...
And on that, I'm going to say good day, everyone. Really great line of questioning there from Rosemary Barton. I will give her credit. That was holding the leader of the opposition to account and asking him to further explain his position. And as I sit here, what I took from that was a very intelligent guy who clearly understands the challenges that this country faces, who understands how the economy works, who believes the government should get out of the way and let the private sector do what the private sector does. Invest, build, help Canada prosper. We have two different things in front of us here right now. We've got the Liberals promising generational spending and generational debt. They'll call it investment. You've got the Conservatives who want to say, no, we're not spending any more than that right now. For now, we've got to take away the things that are making life more expensive for the middle class. And I firmly believe he will do that. Friends, I appreciate your time today. If you want to see the rest of that, hey, by all means, check out Rosemary Barton Live on the CBC on Sunday mornings. That full interview with Pierre Poilievre is available on their YouTube channel. I'll catch you right back here tomorrow for a little preview of the budget. I have no doubt in my mind, because I know how Ottawa works, that there's going to be some leaks today. I'm sure we will have more to report tomorrow, and then we'll see where we end up. By the time the budget comes out tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we will have a strong indication of whether or not we are going into an election. Conservatives are out. The Bloc are out. Will the NDP save the Mark Carney Liberals just like they used to do with Justin Trudeau? That remains to be seen, but tomorrow's going to be a big day. Friends, thank you for your time. I'll see you tomorrow with another episode of Scott Fox After 9. Oh,